Number 8. Titanic. The Titanic disaster was an immense and tragic loss of human life, though it's easy to overlook the sheer expense involved financially too. It reportedly cost the 21st century equivalent of $150 million. While the story of how this Olympic-class vessel from the White Star Line hitting an iceberg is well known, there's actually a little more to it than that. Mention is made of the fierce competition that existed in those days between shipbuilders. The Harland and Wolff Yard in Ireland got the job of building the RMS Titanic, and it took 3 years to finish the 882-foot-long liner. Doesn't sound like a rush job, but even so, the pressure was on to go toe-to-toe with White Star's opponents in the field. It's stressed that the Titanic was well built. That said, there were issues when it set off on its maiden voyage in April 1912. The bulkhead walls were reportedly on the low side. That meant water could spill over the top in certain situations, threatening the stability of the ship. Also, a fire broke out on board, and it's speculated that led to Titanic speeding up and making a collision of some kind at sea more likely. A few days after it left, an iceberg was spotted on the night of April 15th. This was avoided with what felt like a graze against the Titanic's hull. Unfortunately for the crew, they couldn't see underwater. The iceberg had a prominent spur that cut through the hull and left a 300-foot hole for water to pour through. It took less than 3 hours to sink into the North Atlantic near Newfoundland. Amazingly, there was a lack of lifeboats, contributing to the death toll. 2,240 souls were aboard and 1,500 plus died. The $150 million we referred to concerns the ship's construction costs. Titanic included some high-profile figures on its passenger list, such as John Jacob Astor IV. There were also expensive items, the costliest of which was the 19th century oil painting Lassika Sien Aban by Mary Joseph Blondel. Owner Moritz Hakian Bjornström Stephenson could not rescue the piece, so down it went. Number 7. Challenger disaster. The heartbreaking and devastating disaster that engulfed the Challenger space shuttle in January 1986 is still remembered with horror today. Live on air, the shuttle broke apart and exploded. All people could do, both on the ground and around the world, was watch. All 7 crew members lost their lives. The crew were going up there to position a satellite and observe the movements of Halley's Comet. Just after 73 seconds, the shuttle disintegrated. The cause of the tragedy was put down to rubber components called O-rings, which were supposed to seal rocket booster joints. When the rings failed to stretch properly due to being too cold, the joint was breached, which resulted in a gas leak and an explosion. It marked the end of astronauts installing satellites themselves, with NASA relying on what are known as expendable launch vehicles that either get dumped in space or burned up in the atmosphere. The Office of Safety, Reliability, and Quality Assurance was set up following this disaster, which was the agency's first fatal flight accident. The human cost was incalculable, but how much did the agency lose in dollars? The shuttle cost a reported $3.2 billion, which is $8,058,394,160.58 in today's money. Number 6. Vital Bridge. We go to Germany for our next expensive accident, in an automobile crash that brought drama and tragedy to the Vital Bridge in the West German state of North Rhine-Westphalia. This crosses the Vital Valley, which runs between the city of Cologne and the town of Olpe. The date was August 2004. In a total nightmare scenario, a tanker truck and a car smashed into each other on the bridge, carrying 7,039 gallons of fuel. The truck then fell an alarming 90 feet before hitting the ground and exploding. Sadly, the driver lost their life. The bridge, which was opened in 1971, seemed like a substantial structure made of steel and supported by concrete pillars. However, this large vehicle was too much for the guardrail, with its maximum tolerance of 13 tons, according to reports. Such was the heat from the inferno that it damaged the bridge and it needed to be replaced. With a $40 million bill just for temporary work done, you can tell this was going to be pricey. In fact, the Vital Bridge accident is the biggest financial tragedy that the Federal Republic has seen. What was the total cost? Estimates went up to $358 million. By late 2007, it was up and running again, but this was clearly an enormous project. The bridge took just over 3 years to re-establish, all through one crash. Incredible, right? Number 5. B-2 crash. As you can imagine, the United States Air Force spends a lot of money. Often this is for important machinery, technology, and equipment. But sometimes they have accidents, and when that bill comes in, it's pretty eye-watering. This was the case in February 2008 when the B-2 stealth bomber went up in flames for a surprising reason. What was the reason? We'll get into that shortly. The location for the disaster was Andersen Air Force Base in the territory of Guam in the Western Pacific. Inside the plane, called the Spirit of Kansas, two pilots realized something had gone badly wrong when the wing touched the ground after trying to take off. They hit the ejector button before the B-2 tumbled and burned up. What happened? In short, rain got into the sensors, leading to confusion working out the angle they were at. In the cockpit, people typically rely on flight control readings done by machine. There was also reportedly condensation inside what are called the pressure transducers. In short, things that measure pressure levels and keep everything on the straight and narrow. In the end, the plane didn't fly straight and it was a hell of a narrow squeak for the two guys. What was the damage? A super hefty estimate of $1.4 billion, which in today's money is around $1.69 billion. The B-2 was supposed to head home to the Whiteman Base in Missouri. Instead, it crashed and burned in a different part of the world. Sad, but at least no one lost their lives. And it's a reminder of what a precarious business piloting a plane can be. Number 4. Prestige oil spill. In spite of the prestigious name, the situation with this oil tanker got incredibly dirty. As a result, Spain and Portugal witnessed its biggest environmental disaster on record back in 2002. This was a mess in more ways than one. Keep watching to find out how a combination of elements contributed to this disastrous fuel spill at a picturesque location. To begin with, the weather was bad. Even a substantial tanker like the Prestige could run into difficulty. It was traveling through a northwestern Spanish area known as Costa de la Muerte, which translates as the Coast of Death. What are the odds, huh? While the waves lashed the vessel, they managed to spill inside the boat and put pressure on metal that was weak in places. In the end, a reported 50-foot hole was created in the hull. With a major environmental threat in the offing, the Prestige was in trouble, not only with the sea, but the land. It could conceivably have docked into port, but Spain, Portugal, and surrounding countries didn't want that mess on their doorstep. As the crew were evacuated to safety, it seems a whole lot of arguing was going on, with a reported 77,000 metric tons of not just one, but two types of oil. Time was of the essence. Because no one wanted the tanker, it eventually broke in half off the Spanish coast of Galicia, at which point it sank and a shocking 20 million gallons was slowly and inevitably released into the water, tainting the ecosystem for years to come. Astonishingly, 22,000 birds died as the drama unfolded, and apparently 125 tons of fuel seeped into the water every day. It's crazy, right? So what happened in the aftermath, and who was held responsible? Millions of euros were handed out to help the places affected. Fines were eventually issued, and the burning topic of coastal pollution was highlighted as a result. Controversially, the captain of the Prestige was sentenced to 2 years behind bars. The Supreme Court ruled that he'd been reckless, whereas Galicia's court system ruled the other way. All in all, $12 billion was the cost of this epic accident. It was a devastating environmental disaster and a colossal financial one also. Number 3. Chernobyl nuclear disaster. We've all heard of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, which took place in April 1986 in North Ukraine. The cause of the planet's worst nuclear disaster is incalculable. What used to be a populated city called Pripyat is now a no-go zone, long since abandoned. There's been an exclusion zone around the power plant. The cleanup is still going on well into the 21st century, and Chernobyl has become a byword for catastrophe. The impact was felt not just there, but abroad, with nuclear fallout being carried across oceans with the weather. It's reported the disaster cost $200 billion, but really, the figure probably gets bigger by the day. We won't have a true overview for a while yet, so for those of you who don't know, how did this tragedy happen in the first place? When a safety test went horribly wrong, yes, that's right, a safety test was behind the accident, things changed in Pripyat forever. Technicians lost control of the plant's processes, and explosions were triggered. Radioactive material was released, including plutonium and strontium. Because of the type of reactors that were used, there wasn't any containment system. You'd think every reactor would have one, but in this case, once the accident happened, the nasty stuff went straight into the sky. Whilst a couple of workers at the plant perished in the explosion, low in terms of casualties, many suffered from radiation sickness and died from exposure. Russia was also heavily criticized for its response to the disaster and placing political interests ahead of people's safety. An acclaimed HBO drama was made out of the story in 2019, though as you'd expect, Russia was very unhappy with its portrayal. Number 2. Port of Beirut explosion. One of the most shocking and devastating accidents of recent years was the colossal explosive reaction at the port of Beirut in Lebanon, Western Asia in 2020. When a sizable quantity of ammonium nitrate, a common ingredient in household products and beyond, was confiscated from a ship, authorities stored it in a warehouse at the port. The material had actually been there since 2014, reportedly sharing the space with fireworks? Yikes, really? It lay dormant till August 2020. A fire was reported at the scene prior to the disaster. Minutes after the fire engines arrived, there was a massive explosion. While the initial blast was reportedly comparable to approximately 2 tons of TNT, another explosion was powerful enough to be felt in neighboring countries. In terms of seismology, it measured 3.3 in magnitude. A frighteningly large quantity of ammonium nitrate had gone up in smoke. 2,750 tons. Together with the fireworks, it was a recipe for outright catastrophe. Over 200 people lost their lives, and around 300,000 lost their homes. Such was the devastation. The cost of the disaster was reportedly $15.2 billion. The fallout from the tragedy went all the way to the top. Already under pressure, Prime Minister Hassan Diab and his administration were gone within days of the disaster taking place. We should add that, at the time of making this video, the cause of the blast hasn't been determined. Number 1. Great Hanshin Earthquake Disaster. Japan is one of the worst places on the planet to live in terms of seismic activity. Because of its positioning, it's subject to a greater number of earthquakes than most places. No less than 4 of the Earth's tectonic plates rub up against each other here. There's the Eurasian, Philippine, Pacific, and North American plates. So when a slippage occurs, the effects are truly world-changing. In January 1995, the Eurasian and Philippine plates had what's known as a strike-slip fault. What is that? It's essentially when enough strain is placed on a plate for it to give. The result is deadly but surprisingly short. Japan's Kobe earthquake lasted a mere 20 seconds, but that was sufficient to devastate areas such as the Hanshin region and the city of Kobe. The ground the city was built on wasn't exactly the strongest, and it was close to the epicenter of the quake, which was a reported 20 kilometers away. Here we see the collapsed Hanshin Expressway, which simply toppled over like a domino. The disaster is also referred to as the Great Hanshin Earthquake. Measuring around 7 in magnitude, it resulted in the deaths of over 6,000 people. 45,000 people lost their homes, and the bill went to an extraordinary $100 billion plus. A reported 50,000 citizens had to leave the city and find somewhere else to live, but the administration rebuilt. It wasn't a small job, of course, but after several years, the city was in a fit enough state to try and welcome folk back. Whether you'd want to be there after this act of God is a whole nother question. We've seen a whole lot of death and destruction during this rundown. Whether it's caused by natural forces, human error, or something else, it's fair to say the dollars rack up. The Great Hanshin Earthquake disaster is a powerful reminder that no matter how much you anticipate the worst, some disasters just happen right out of the blue. Thanks for watching. Are there any expensive accidents you think should have been included on the list? Let us know in the comments, be sure to subscribe, and see you soon.